Leave you with the summary and then your national forecast will follow. Good night now.
The showers will be further north from an area of low pressure anchored to the north of Scotland. So a breezy day for certainly the north and west of Scotland. Plenty of showers here, few for Northern Ireland, far north of England. These will tend to become fewer into the afternoon as high pressure continues to build in from the south. Much of England and Wales dry with sunny spells, with light winds. So it'll feel a touch warmer, 20 or 21 degrees here, the mid-teens further north. Now here's this area of high pressure which is going to bring the warm weather this weekend, pushing off into the North Sea but bringing some very warm and humid air off the near continent. But this area of low pressure will try to encroach in as well, could threaten to bring some thundery rain to western areas late on Sunday and into next week. But the weekend certainly looking warmer with plenty of sunny spells around. It'll be noticeably warmer across the southeast as we head on towards Sunday, perhaps 25 or 26 degrees. Then into next week, it looks like it could turn even hotter for southern areas, but with an increased chance of some thundery downpours. Good night.
There's a new girl in town. She's forgotten all about you.
Maybe they're working together, girl on girl.
You have no idea who your mom is sharing information with.
I want this ghost found and Villanelle wrapped up.
She's behind that door!
Killing Eve, Saturday at 9:15 on BBC One. Box set available now on BBC iPlayer.
Apollo 11's distance from the Earth, 112,386 nautical miles.
Little chilly side. My feet are a little chilly.
This is like a gigantic crater with my clear monster.
But it is exciting. Magnificent desolation.
Experience the mission in the words of those who took us there. 8 days to the moon and back. Coming soon to BBC Two and BBC iPlayer.
Henning Vane puts patriotism in the spotlight. This week follows in an hour here on BBC One. Now, it's been a week of asking questions, and here are some more.
Tonight we're in Tottenham in North London. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Kwasi Kwarteng, the government's Brexit minister. He worked in the Treasury under Philip Hammond and is a key member of Boris Johnson's leadership team. Margot James, a member of the Tory party since she was 17, a former businesswoman and the government's digital minister. She is now backing Jeremy Hunt for party leader. Elected in 2017, currently Labour's shadow minister for Labour, Laura Pidcock. Ed Davey, Liberal Democrat spokesperson on Home Affairs. He's standing to become the leader of his party. And entrepreneur, qualified barrister and ardent Brexiteer, the boss of Wetherspoons, Tim Martin. Welcome to our panel, to our audience here, and of course to you at home. You can argue along in the usual fashion using hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook and on Instagram. Join in the conversation. Let's get started with our first question tonight from Maria Betancourt.
Is Boris Johnson unbeatable?
Well, he's done pretty well tonight, hasn't he, Kwasi Kwarteng? 160 votes. Sure. Jeremy Hunt is now going to be contesting against Boris Johnson with 77 votes. Is he unbeatable now?
I wouldn't say anyone is unbeatable. I mean, we've seen in politics, Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, Brexit was never meant to happen, the Conservatives were meant to get a huge majority in 2017, and none of those things happened. So I wouldn't say that Boris is unbeatable. He's in a good position, but now it's come to the members. The decision will be between Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. Both of them, I think, are good candidates, and we have to wait and see how that unfolds. I think Boris is in a good, strong position. I think he's a very, very good candidate, but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Now, Margot, you were supporting Rory Stewart. You've now thrown your weight behind Jeremy Hunt. Can he do it?
Yes, I think he can. He's obviously starting from behind. But although Boris got just over half of the parliamentary party behind him, it was only just over half.
But there were 3 candidates.
Well, he only got over half of the parliamentary party behind him. And I think that although when Boris was... a lot of us will remember Boris as Mayor of London, and I think he was a very good mayor. I think since Brexit and since a lot of things, since his time as Foreign Secretary, I think there are more questions about his fitness to lead. And I think that the campaign, well, I mean, I think that he's a brilliant journalist and columnist, and he's given to making strong claims, and he's given to floating and flying kites about this idea and that without much regard to the consequences, the cost, the practicality. And I think the more of these ideas that get abroad, the more quickly they will be scrutinised by the whole of the media, and I think things could come undone. Of course, we've seen through the initial stages of this campaign, his campaign managers keeping him well out of public view. And there's a reason for that, and we'll just see what happens in the next 6 weeks.
Laura?
I think amongst the selectorate, so the Tory members, he is unbeatable. But I would also say that he is deplorable. He is fueled by racism. He's fueled by homophobia. He said this. I represent. Let me just tell you this. I represent an area, right, which had Medhamsley Detention Centre in, and you can Google it and see the horrific historic sexual abuse that took place against boys and young men there. Boris Johnson said of investigating historical sexual abuse that it was spaffing money up against the wall. Is that person really fit to lead our country? To say that people that have been through these examples of historical sexual abuse should not have their justice? And I'll say this about either of the candidates, actually. None of them have committed to an end to austerity. There are real examples all over this country of people suffering. 14 million people in poverty, 1.5 million people destitute, people using food banks in work as commonplace. He has none of the answers to those really serious issues in our nation. So he will be beatable, but it will be at a general election.
I'm going to come to you in the order to make... This is not the first time that Boris Johnson has been called a racist.
Boris Johnson has been in the public eye for more than 20 years. I was a candidate in 2008. People hurled all the abuse, all these accusations were hurled against him in 2008, and you know what? He won. And he was a successful mayor, as Margot acknowledged. Some people might disagree with that, but his record was good, and it was so good that he actually was re-elected. And he was re-elected at a time when the Conservative Party nationally was 17 points behind the Labour Party. And he managed to deliver, he was involved, it wasn't all his doing, but he was involved in a successful delivery of the Olympics. And you know what? If the Olympics had gone badly, he would have been the first person to get the blame. So that went well, and he was seen as a uniting, unifying force. He was a very capable mayor, and I think he can do the same thing for... He can do the same thing for Great Britain, and I look forward to that.
The racism comment.
He's not a racist. When he was a mayor...
Hold on a second. What about the letterbox comment? What about the Piccadilly comment? What about... hold on a second. What about addressing that very serious point to say that investigating historical sexual abuse, essentially paedophilia, is spaffing money up against the wall? What would you say in backing that man to all of those victims of sexual abuse? Tell them, what would you say?
The first thing I would say, in terms of the accusation that he's a racist, when he was mayor, he had good, diverse policies that meant that lots of people, his mayoralty reflected the communities that this country and this city represents. He was someone who was an inclusive mayor. He was someone who was very open about the need to bring in talent from across the world. He was someone who was very, very positive about London and its multicultural heritage. He was extremely proud of that. And that's why he was re-elected in 2012. When the Olympics happened, the whole eyes of the world, people from every country, every race... No, but I'm dealing with a racist comment. And the suggestion that he was racist then would have been completely ridiculous. He's not a racist, and he's someone who brings people together.
The man at the back in the yellow top.
I personally find it hard to believe why everybody's so hypnotised by Boris Johnson. I mean... Sure, he is a personality. He's a personality, but we're going into a time of absolute crisis, and we need somebody who can both lead from the front and unify people behind him. And all he's done is find subsections of society and alienate them one by one.
Yeah.
The man in the back then.
Yeah, I have nothing personally against Boris Johnson, but what I will say is, how have you guys, the political elite, managed to get our politics to a stage where we can possibly have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister? I mean, as we should be the ones that lead politics throughout the world, and we're trying in all different countries, how are they looking on us thinking, my God, we've got Boris as Prime Minister?
Now look, I know there are Boris Johnson supporters in the audience. Let's hear from at least one of them. Yes, the man there with the glasses.
Yeah. Oh, OK, yeah. So, if you think of the two, do you not think that because Jeremy Hunt used to be a Remainer, that actually, when Theresa May was Prime Minister and she was a Remainer, she couldn't deliver Brexit? So if Jeremy Hunt goes in it's just going to be a continual whirlwind, and actually, if Boris Johnson goes in, whether you like it or not, at least Brexit will happen.
Which is obviously something you'd like to see, Tim Martin.
Yes, I think it's wrong to demonise Boris in that way. I think it's exaggerated. He is, unlike many politicians, he was a successful magazine editor for 8 years, which is a very tough gig. And as Kwasi said, he was a successful mayor of London. I really don't think he is an out-and-out racist, nor could he have been.
Just a casual one, then.
Well, that's a low blow. It's easy to accuse people of racism. I just don't think he is, nor do I think that any of the top politicians are, for all their faults. I'm sure that he isn't, and I think it is a low blow.
It's a low blow, absolutely.
Ed Davey.
Our country is divided. Our country is in a mess. We need a Prime Minister who's going to heal those divisions and sort out the mess, and Boris Johnson isn't that Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
And let me explain.
But the question was, is he unbeatable, Ed?
Well, I think he is beatable, partly because, whether he's a racist or not, he's made racist comments. He's made homophobic comments. He's made Islamophobic comments. He's made anti-Scottish comments. You cannot heal our country when you take aim at lots of different people in our country. And he may be beatable, Fiona, but at the moment we have a Tory party very split. You have to have two Tories on a panel in Question Time these days to represent the Tory party, and they're split on ideological grounds. You've got one Tory who wants a hard Brexit, which will damage our country. And you've got another Tory who wants a no-deal Brexit, which will destroy our economy. I think we should reject both of the candidates. I don't think they're fit. And I'm hoping there will be a general election. We get rid of them.
OK. Let's get a little bit more into detail of what's facing it. Let's hear from Nicole Carbonara.
How is it possible to leave the European Union since the withdrawal agreement won't be renegotiated and Parliament will block a no-deal Brexit?
Well, that's the crux of it, isn't it? And you're French, are you?
I am.
Yes. Margot, how's that going to work?
Well,
what's your candidate going to do about that?
I mean, my original candidate, Rory Stewart, maintained, and I agreed with him, really, that...
Well, you don't really agree with Jeremy Hunt?
Well, if I could... I think...
You don't really?
If I could just explain why I agree with Rory, I thought that it was extremely unlikely that anyone could renegotiate the backstop because it's part of the withdrawal agreement. That's the contentious point. I did take the trouble to speak to one of the Prime Minister's Europe advisors, and he said that he thought that there was a possibility, probably about a 10% chance, of being able to put some kind of time limit on the backstop. And I thought that my constituents voted 70% to leave. And I thought to myself, if there is that 10% chance, I'm willing to let it go a few more months, but not much longer.
And so what does Jeremy Hunt get you, Margot?
Jeremy Hunt, by the way, is an entrepreneur. He's a really good negotiator. He's our foreign secretary. He's made a good impression on European leaders.
But this is all very general. What's the detail of how he's going to manage to break the impasse that Nicole's talking about?
One of the reasons I supported Jeremy was because I thought if anybody has got the relationships, the negotiating ability to do something about this, even if it is only a 10% chance, then I'm willing to give him a chance. That's my view. I'm sceptical about the ability of our government to renegotiate anything to do with the withdrawal agreement, because we all know Europe has set the standard here, and the Irish government are dead against any change to the backstop. So it's fraught with difficulty, but I do think that in a bid to bring the country back together and get some sort of sensible Brexit, it is worth the chance, and Jeremy is the man to do it.
You don't sound fantastically optimistic there, Margot. I think...
Well, I'm being honest.
No,
I mean,
well, that is always good.
Not always.
But we've got to try and break the parliamentary impasse. Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit, but we realise that's got to be done democratically. So we believe that we've got to get through this parliamentary deadlock through a people's vote. And that's what we're going to be arguing for day in, day out.
And how would you break the impasse to get that? Because that has not managed to secure the back in Parliament either.
But it goes to your point. There's been no majority for a no-deal Brexit, no majority for the Prime Minister's deal. The option that got the most votes was actually a people's vote, and I thought it got the most. It didn't win a majority. I know that, but it got the most votes.
If it doesn't get through, that doesn't really.
But if I may finish, the Chancellor.
Hang on, don't shut up.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer today, someone who hasn't previously voted for a people's vote, he said, a Tory, that a referendum is the only way to break the impasse. I believe the Tory Chancellor is right. I think if we had a vote on a people's vote, as Liberal Democrats want, it would get a majority next time, and we're going to be fighting for that.
So, Kwasi, let's come to your candidate then, to Boris Johnson. What is the detail of how he is going to break the impasse that Nicole has?
So the first thing I'd say about a people's vote is that it seems absurd to me to have a second referendum before you've implemented the results of the first referendum. That seems to be completely absurd.
It's because you've not been able to implement it. Your party is so split and incapable of implementing it.
And on the question of no deal, the problem that we had coming into the 29th of March is that our no deal position, the Prime Minister said, I believe 100 times in the House of Commons, that no deal was better than a bad deal.
No, we know all that.
Wasn't credible.
How is Boris Johnson going to break the deadlock?
So what he's said is that we're going to have to take no deal absolutely seriously. No ifs, no buts. We're going to have to leave deal or no deal on the 31st of October.
And that's
been a very clear
guarantee
message
from Boris Johnson? Because listening to him the other night, I wasn't so sure.
As far as I'm concerned, that's a cast-iron guarantee. And they're not going to take you seriously as a negotiating partner. We've seen this in March. If you take no deal off the table, we simply weren't credible.
And you think that's the one thing that will unlock it?
And the reason why we extended was because our Prime Minister wrote a letter asking for the extension. And Boris has been absolutely clear, if he's in number 10, he won't be writing any letters to Donald Tusk asking for an extension.
But just so I'm clear, you think that is the one key thing that's going to unlock this impasse?
I think it's a major difference between our position now.
Do you actually trust Boris Johnson to do anything that he says?
I'm absolutely. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. I am absolutely 100% behind Boris Johnson. I supported him in 2016. I campaigned for him as mayor when he got re-elected, and we were 17 points down in the polls. I was there in the Olympics, and I think he's absolutely the right man, not only to govern and lead a government, but to lift the spirits of this country. I mean, we've had 2 years where we've been completely downbeat.
We don't want a comedian as Prime Minister.
No, he's not a comedian. He's not a comedian. I think we do need some self-belief, and I hope that he can inject that into this country, which has been lacking for the last 2 years.
Let's hear what our audience thinks. Yes, the woman in the red jacket.
I'm absolutely disgusted to hear this, that, you know, you're supposed to be supporting somebody like Boris. You say that he did so well. I worked on the Olympics, and at the time he was the right person for the Olympics because we were trying to promote London as a city. We were trying to promote this country for tourism. The job that he's got is not tourism, it's actually leading the country.
Yes,
the second point... The second point is you say that, yes, he wants to say the no deal is on the table. Has he actually thought about the strategy that when you have no deal, what are you going to do with immigration? What are you going to do with all the people in the City of London who, a lot of people within the City of London are foreigners, probably like the lady behind who is French. What happens then?
So EU citizens' rights...
What is Boris going to do?
No, the EU citizens' rights has been absolutely guaranteed by this government, and it will be absolutely guaranteed if Boris becomes Prime Minister. We've been very, very clear about that. And Ed will know, as the other MPs around this panel, that the House of Commons has a broad consensus to defend and enshrine EU citizens' rights. There's no
He's
going
supposed
back
to be
on
leading
that.
a country,
Not
though,
going back.
not
And you
marketing.
mentioned the marketing is important. I mean, it's not the whole
But you're not
point of
supposed to
leadership.
just say, "Welcome
but
to London."
But selling Britain, selling the brand, selling our country, and standing up for our worldwide reputation. That is important. That's an important part.
Is that why,
of a
he
global
wasn't
leader.
at Channel 4?
Let's hear from some other people as well. I'm, of course, very interested to hear what you have to say as well. The young man there.
Whilst I don't want to see Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, I find it very hypocritical that you should support Jeremy Corbyn, who has made some very anti-Semitic comments and is considered anti-Semitic by many of the Jewish community and the population of the UK as a whole.
Laura, I'll come back to you in a minute if I can. The man there in the blue jacket.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with Kwasi in terms of the negotiating strategy that Boris, whether you like him or not, might employ, which is to take things to the brink. You know, we always blink first when it comes to the EU. The EU is standing firm in their, you know, what they want from these negotiations. We've got to take it to the brink a bit more and be a bit braver and expect them to come back. Either that or we do suitable no-deal preparations. It's both a good
And we're
negotiation.
doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If you say you are. It's
We are.
both a good negotiating tactic to do that and just prudent
we've already
government. So absolutely, we need to take it to the brink and negotiate a bit smarter, I'd say.
The man in the glasses.
Are we actually prepared for no deal? Have we, as the government, done enough preparation for no deal?
Absolutely.
There are some things you can't prepare for. There's a lot you can't prepare for about no deal, actually, because a lot of the consequences of leaving without a deal will hit us in years to come. There'll be short-term chaos. There will be some improvement, but the long-term disinvestment from this country will really have a huge impact on our future economic growth.
I just don't believe that's true. We're also demonising no deal. No deal on day one means you save £39 billion. There's no deal obligation. Number two is that you regain control of fishing, which is a very important industry. And number three is, which not a lot of MPs in my experience understand, is you can eliminate tariffs on over 12,000 goods imports from outside the EU, and that will reduce prices in the shops in Tottenham and elsewhere. Plus, you'll increase the level of democracy. And the problem with the EU, it's becoming more and more undemocratic. It's got unelected presidents, it's got MEPs who can't initiate legislation, unlike these MPs, and it's got a court that isn't accountable. Now, the biggest nexus in economics is between democracy and prosperity, and the problem with the EU, it's becoming more and more undemocratic. That's the economic issue that we have in this country.
Let me just come to Laura. Laura, so the question from Nicole is how is it possible to leave the EU since the withdrawal agreement will be renegotiated and Parliament will block a no-deal Brexit?
I mean, this is what we've been grappling with, and the change in mood in the room when Brexit's introduced is like the nation at large. There is,
and also grappling within the Labour Party.
Absolutely. I mean, there are differences of opinion in the Labour Party. Clearly, the huge delay in getting us to a point where there is a withdrawal agreement in the Tory Party is because of that historic, bitter tension on the question of the EU. I think some things have changed. What I've noticed happening, Fiona, is this: that no deal is being positioned to leave us as though that is the purest form of Brexit, and I think that is disingenuous. That getting a deal is become proxy for like sellout or compromise, or you give it in to the EU, and I think that is also disingenuous. But the question is the most pertinent one. Arithmetic has to change, and there has to be. We called for a long time for a general election because we knew that there was this deep political impasse. We, in good faith, entered into negotiations, voted for many different options in Parliament. But I'm a bit sick of my constituents, if I'm honest, being reduced to leave or remain. They are so much more than that. And they're more than that because they are, as I mentioned before, experiencing almost a 10th year of austerity. And I think two things have changed, actually, in the whole equation around our EU negotiations and, questions about a second referendum. It was a game changer for me, actually, to hear Donald Trump about having access to our NHS. That was a game changer for me. having used the NHS very heavily in the last year for positive and negative reasons, the idea that you would come out with a bill, you know, a huge bill for the services that you would receive is something that I and the Labour Party will fight bitterly. So that is a threat when we are talking about free trade deals with the United States. And there is also the threat of Boris Johnson. And I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, but there was a very pertinent point made by an audience member before. How have we got here? You know, things are so polarised that Boris Johnson is seen as the answer to anything is quite
Would
incredible.
you prefer Margot's candidate, Jeremy Hunt?
I don't want any
She doesn't
Tory.
like any Tory.
I don't want any Tory.
Given what you've said about the NHS law, are you moving towards a Remain position then? And is that where Labour's going to be next week?
What the Labour Party has always said, if we have got in front of us this no-deal situation, that millionaires, you know, and rich people might be quite comforted and, you know, might be quite easy about because they are cushioned from the economic impact of a no-deal scenario. That if we are facing that, the Labour Party has always said that we have to explore all options,
So
one
what
of which putting the decision back
But
to
you
the
still
people.
haven't got a clear,
position
on the referendum.
It's not indecisive. It has been really, really clear. There has been so much misinterpretation. I'll take you through the exact process if you want.
Fiona, the Labour Party can't tell us whether they want a referendum or not. We now hear that if there was a referendum, they're not sure whether they ask people to vote Leave or Remain. I mean, there's utterly no leadership from the Labour Party. They're supposed to be the opposition.
Okay, well, let Laura answer that.
So Jeremy Corbyn has put to Parliament that there should be a second referendum. Jeremy Corbyn has said in a no-deal scenario, let me be very clear, in a no-deal scenario or a terrible Tory deal, which there will be with Boris, it will be put back to the people because this is an emergency situation.
Would you support Leave or Remain?
Would you support Leave or Remain?
Well, I'll tell you the process for that as well if you want.
Well, no, let's not go through a whole process. Are you able to say either of those two words at this point, Leave or Remain?
So the Labour Party, all of our policies are decided democratically. We have a conference coming up in September.
The point is, Fiona, surely that the politicians...
And it will be decided there.
And you're talking over Laura, which is
OK,
not something
I'll finish that
I've
sentence once more. Right? We have a conference coming up in September, and the policy will be decided.
OK, let's hear from our audience, the woman in the pink top.
This question's mainly for Tim Martin. It's interesting to see that you can patronise MPs and say that they don't understand the trade deal that's going to come in once we've left the EU, where we can get things for cheaper from other countries. I think it's interesting that you're trying to say that you are pushing this Brexit due to it being positive for the people, when clearly it is to line your own pockets, because you have come out in the newspaper to say that you want to reduce the taxes that you pay, you want to reduce the wages that you pay. If you were really a person of the people, you wouldn't. 20,000 independent British pubs have gone out of business since you started up the Wetherspoons chain. Houses that are within walking distance of
Are you blaming him personally for that?
No, I'm saying that business owners such as himself lie about the reasons that they support Brexit and say that it is for the people, when actually the equalisation that you want on tax between pubs and supermarkets would hit the poorest families the hardest.
OK, if you're calling Tim a liar, I think we should allow Tim to respond.
I think Boris Johnson said that was a minestrone of accusations or something along those lines. What I said about MPs is that they appeared not to understand the nature of the European Union, which is basically a protectionist system which charges tariffs on wine, rice, oranges, bananas and many other things, so people in the shops pay more. And that is a point which hasn't come out. So if we're able, if we leave the EU, to reduce those tariffs and reduce prices in the shops, which is a plus, not for people who run big businesses like myself, but for everyone, including me.
OK. I'm going to move on because we had so many questions from all of you on other subjects, and I want to be able to cover some of those. But before I do, I just want to tell you that next week, Question Time is coming from Halifax, and the week after that, we will be in Chichester. So call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience, or go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. OK, let's move on. Reverend Lee Clark.
This year, there has been over 30 stabbings in London alone. Have our politicians failed us, and do they now accept that they have blood on their hands?
And of course, there's been a horrific death toll in London only in the last 5 days. Laura?
I think it is definitely driven by the state. Lots of the societal ills that we see can be traced back to the government, because of course there are real political decisions made about communities that then have a huge impact. And I like to look at everything through a kind of sociological model that actually, why does crime take place? Why do people stab each other? Why are people so needlessly losing life on the streets? And it's for a whole range of reasons. There isn't one simple reason. I think.
And do you think politicians have failed us, which is the question?
Well, I think I think yes, very clearly politicians have failed on many aspects of society. I think particularly
on all sides.
I think particularly on crime. Well, we're nearly into the 10th year of a Conservative government, so I don't know how far you want me to go back. But this government have cut the police so much, and I know it's not just an issue of policing, but in my area we've lost 370 officers. So sometimes I am very, very worried if an incident, say a domestic violence incident, kicked off in one part of my constituency, but there might be a fight on a high street in another part of my constituency. Can the police cope? And then all of the back office stuff where they are struggling so hard to investigate all of the historic sexual offences that I mentioned before. But it's more than that, isn't it? If we lose good quality youth work, if young people are excluded from school because they are poor, essentially, very often, where are they being lost to? What are those young people doing? And so we have to look at school exclusions, we have to look at austerity and youth provision being almost non-existent, actually. Provision for drug and alcohol services being almost non-existent. No libraries, Sure Start centres closing. When you look at this in the round, it's easy to see why crime goes up, and it's easy to see why the police can't handle it the way they used to, because they've been cut to the bone.
Well, I agree with a lot of Laura says. There's an epidemic of serious violence in our country. It's one of the most serious things taking place in our country, and we've got to do things. We've got to invest in the police. We've got to invest in community police, but invest in the youth services. I've had 2 fatal stabbings in the last 2 years in my constituency, and I've gone and met the mothers and talked to the family. And when you go to their homes and you sit there in the lounge and they show you the photos of their son who's been killed, and they talk about them going to their graveside and trying to talk to their lost one, you realise how serious this is and how it's affecting the lives of so many of our people. And what they say to me, a particular mother who's launched an amazing charity called Drop a Knife, Save a Life. She's trying to fight back, real leadership. But what she says to me is, please can we have more community police? Please can we have things for the young people to do? Please will you listen? Why isn't the government not listening? And I think we just have to listen to the victims and their families.
There are so many hands up, so I'm going to try and come around quite a few of you quickly if I can. Let's just go back to Reverend Clark, because you did ask this question.
Yeah, I did. So the reason why I asked specifically about politicians is because what I've heard straight away is it's someone else's fault. It's not my fault. And what you've been spending all this time over Brexit, this ball's just been completely dropped. In Tottenham alone, in the last 2 months, we've had a stabbing just round the corner. My vicarage was a crime scene with a stabbing. I'm involved in the Scouts, and one of my Scouts was killed because of knife crime. And I'm seeing blame culture around the table rather than saying we need to work together and get this sorted.
And what do you think could be done?
Taking my parish alone, we have lots of low-level antisocial behaviour, lots of littering, lots of fly tipping. I've got a big belief in that policy of dealing with the low-level stuff, because then that'll have a knock-on impact on the high level. But it's just being ignored. Okay. While we're dealing with Brexit, we've just forgotten about it.
Thank you. The woman with the glasses there.
Ed, if you think that we need to invest in public services like the police, then why did the Lib Dems back Tory austerity, and how can we trust you not to do that again?
Ed, briefly, because I want to get around more people in the audience.
We did make some tough decisions, but since 2015, when we weren't in government, there's been £1 billion taken from the front line of policing. There's been a loss of 5,000 police officers. The cuts have gone on much deeper since we left office. We actually held the Tories back from many of the cuts they wanted to do. It's absolutely true.
You were a cabinet minister when most of the heavy lifting was done.
And let me
you're running away from your record.
Not at all.
And you're not taking responsibility
Not at all.
for the decisions that you made in cabinet.
Not at all.
I was the backbencher, you were a cabinet, and you were asking me.
And let me tell you what I said in cabinet.
I defended that government.
Let me tell you what I said in cabinet. When George Osborne wanted to have 10 billion cuts to welfare, we said no. In 2011, when the RPI was wanting to increase the benefits by 5.2%, Osborne wanted to freeze them. We said no. We looked after the vulnerable because you lot wanted to cut them to the bone.
But you didn't resign from cabinet, did you?
Listen.
You didn't resign from the cabinet, did you?
No, because I fought and I stopped a lot of the cuts that you made.
Fascinating that this argument between you two is. I just want to hear a bit more from the audience. There's so many hands up. The woman in the yellow top there.
Just like the vicar said, yeah, at the moment, you just sat there and had a disagreement with another person in Parliament, right? And I work with the youth. And as far as I'm concerned, we lost in 2015, we lost 15 young people. And I know that because at the place I worked, we have a campaign called Life Not Knife, yeah? And I put those pictures up of the boys, white boys, black boys, Asian boys. This is not a colour thing, yeah? It's not an economic thing. It's a young person thing, yeah? And that's the problem. And the thing is as well, this is exactly the same as Brexit. You guys are so entrenched in your party lines and your party issues that you cannot unify us. The problem with Brexit is the fact that it wasn't a huge majority. You should have asked us again right away so it was a majority, right? Once it was a majority, then you can say that people have gone so far, but you're failing the youth because you won't come together. You're failing them. What are you going to do?
Okay. The man in the corner.
Time and time again, we're hearing politicians be blamed and teachers being blamed, etc. Why is there not an onus on the parents? I've grown up in Hackney. I've seen friends and other people in my community getting stabbed and being killed. But I know my mum was always there for me, and other significant adults as well. I knew not to pick up a knife. I knew not to participate in any sort of illegal activity. Where are the parents in this? Why are we not blaming them? Why is it always the politicians and the teachers?
Woman there in the purple.
I think that I'm 17 myself. I'm doing my A-levels. I'm leaving my school in fear. I'm told to not have my headphones in, to not take my phone out, to make sure that I'm not in any danger. I shouldn't have to have those responsibilities. I should be able to go focus on my education, not worry about getting mugged on my way home from school. I know my borough used to have nearly 100 wards of police, and now we have 21. When I went to a council meeting, I went and I was told every single problem was due to the cut in police, and nothing is being done about that.
Man here at the front.
There are some issues that surely should be cross-party, and we're talking. And as the gentleman pointed out, lots of arguments about what happened in the past, about how the Lib Dems acted, how the Tories acted. Just like those lives that were lost, they are in the past, and it's horrible to think about. But it's also horrible to think about. It's almost like the politicians, with all due respect, are living in the past on this issue. Surely the talk should be about the future, and if possible, a complete cross-party collaboration beyond party lines.
I mean, Kwasi, you're sitting next to me saying, I agree, but what you're referring to is partly the spat you two just had.
Well, I think one of the main
so you can't have it both ways.
No, I can. I mean, what I'm saying is that what I was addressing specifically...
I'm not sure they agree with
what
you.
I was addressing specifically was Ed trying to run away from his record. That was a specific...
Okay,
There's a broader point where I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we talked about Boris Johnson as mayor, we haven't mentioned the current mayor, we haven't mentioned Sadiq Khan, but he is part of this piece as well. I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying that if we're going to have a cross-party cooperation, he and the government are going to have to work together to try and get to a solution. And that's also, frankly, one of the reasons why I want to get Brexit done and dusted. I want to move on. and that's why I'm supporting Boris and for what it's worth, because I believe that once we get through Brexit, we will have much more constructive engagement with the really pressing issues like knife crime, which has spiraled out of control, not over the last 10 years, over the last 2 or 3 years in London. Rates were much lower 4 or 5 years ago, and they are much higher now. And I think we can work together if we get people like Sadiq Khan and the government working together.
I have to say, just for information, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, says that knife attacks on young people in London are down on the year before. She says her key metric has always been injuries to under 25s, and we have 15% less.
But the number of deaths is
fewer.
higher.
Well, I'm just
the
quoting
attacks
you.
are less, but the number
fewer
of deaths.
young people stabbed this year. Margot James.
The number of deaths is higher.
Yes, I mean, I also had a constituent knifed to death in a club, and it has had a traumatic effect across the whole community. It is to look to the future, though, and the present, in fact. I think it's good to see that finally there is some cross-party working going on. The Home Secretary works directly with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, works with your MP here in Tottenham, David Lammy, is on the same task force. I'm on there as the Digital Minister, and a lot of other people from charities and really great voluntary groups and the police are all on this. And I'm very struck by the work that the Children's Commissioner has done to identify the gang issue and unpick it. Talking about my local area, which is not here, I represent a seat near Birmingham. And in Birmingham, half the knife crime is drug-related, and pretty much all the gun crime is drug-related. And we have to get on top of the gang violence and the ease with which some of these gangs operate, and also recruit very young children who are below the age of criminal responsibility to do some of the legwork. And that gets them in. And it's absolutely tragic.
But Margot,
criminalising
bringing
young
you back
people.
to the question...
Yes. Oh, yes.
Have politicians failed us, and do they
Yeah.
accept they have blood on their hands? Would you accept that as a description of you?
I would accept that the politicians, of course, bear some responsibility for some of the decisions, both when they go well and when they go badly. And I think that the Home Secretary has acknowledged that we do need more police in some parts of the country. And he has managed to get from the Treasury £1 billion of extra money to put into the police service. And it's not just incumbent on the police to use that money wisely, it's also the importance of working with other agencies, working with local authorities, social services,
But
schools.
They're all on their knees in terms of the resources they have to answer some of these questions. And I get that point of like, why don't you all come together? Why don't you all come together to solve this really important issue? But when people are ideologically opposed to funding youth services, you know, drug and alcohol services, then it is very difficult, and that's why we join different political parties. I know
But
it's so
that's not
frustrating.
true, Laura.
Well,
What
there
you've said
isn't a
isn't
statutory youth
true.
service. There are so many
no
less.
opposition to funding youth services.
But there isn't youth services.
There really isn't.
But you live in an alternative reality.
No,
because
I mean,
there
I've
aren't
seen
youth
the money.
workers on the
My
ground.
department has put forward a lot of the money towards a £200 million youth fund to put into areas where young people are at risk of joining gangs.
Margaret,
So
can I just
think
ask
it's
in the
important
audience, is there
we
anyone...
acknowledge that.
Hang on,
That's right.
It's too late. It's too late. What's wrong with you people?
You've not been sitting there for over 20 years talking about this.
That's not enough. When
Yeah.
I was in London, you used to have the ILEA, Inner London Educational Authority, yeah?
That's
They
right.
used to take over the schools in the summertime, and your mum, who was on maybe a low income or on benefits, right, was able to afford. Do you know how many people cannot afford to send their children to an after-school club?
school.
Do you know how many parents who are like myself and are 30-something, right, and are having to work in retail? In order for you, anybody who's got an office job, yes, it's fantastic to go and do your shopping at 8 o'clock, but that person who's properly in that shop at 8 o'clock has got children at home. There's there's not enough supervision. People are not near their grandparents. Then you want to move people out of their borough where they live to Peterborough or to the seaside. It's a mess. It's a mess.
question on the panel.
As a non-politician, I would say that I think that it does require what Sadiq Khan calls a holistic approach, and I think that it's right to say that that is taking place with the people that have been mentioned, the different groups that have been mentioned here. It's very difficult to wave a magic wand. The lady in yellow there has said it's not just economic, is one of the things that she said earlier. There's a partly, when you're dealing with youth, and we all know this, you're dealing with a cultural thing, and I hate to use the word in this context, a fashion thing. But if people feel it's cool to be in a gang and to have a knife, it's very, very, very difficult to break.
I mean, Tim, a lot of young people have talked about how they feel they have no choice but to be in a gang.
Exactly, I don't mean that, exactly. Then you've got no choice, if you're not in the gang, to defend yourself. So it's a terrible problem.
This gang thing,
more fear than fashion, I think, Tim, is probably...
Over 20 years ago, when this postcode war started, this has been going on from 98, 99. And people were sat round tables talking about it then. It's now spiralled out of control, and you're still sitting down talking. What is it going to take for the MPs to sit down and say something's got to be done? Is it going to be your son or your daughter that's going to be killed for you to deal with it? We are fed up of seeing our parents crying. We're fed up of it. We're not supposed to be, as adults, we are not supposed to be burying our children. Our children are supposed to be burying us. And I've got 14 grandchildren, and I am so scared. So scared. Not only London, this is happening in Manchester, it's happening in Birmingham, it's happening up and down the UK. The only place who has really taken up a stance to say that they are going to do something about it is Scotland.
Yeah.
They have got off their backsides and done something, and you lot ain't doing nothing. And this is what I'm working for, to pay my tax, to sit down and watch you lot every year take a £2,000 pay rise when people are out there suffering. Your own soldiers are sleeping on the street that went and served in the war, and they're sleeping on the street and they're homeless. You lot don't give a damn about nobody other than yourselves.
Sir, if you go down the road, you'll see a school called Elwood Academy. I'd urge you to go there because there, the services are down. Okay, you have teachers that cannot afford to teach anymore because they've got so many classes to go to. The system inherently comes from the fact that as a society we have not adapted to the new modern generation. I am from that new modern generation, and let me tell you, I know a lot of people who have entered crime because they hadn't had the support at school. This is a disgrace for all of you people to sit there and say it's a fashion. We've done this, we've done that.
Well, it was only Tim.
No, you be quiet, sir, because quite frankly, you don't know what you're talking about. This is a street issue, OK?
No, I agree with you.
So you have the power
mostly,
to change things, yet you stand there going, I agree. Do it.
Well,
why not?
Well, Tim's running clubs. I mean, Kwasi, when you hear this and you hear the
anger,
unbridled frustration
Absolutely.
of the woman there, do you sit and think, we've done a pretty good job?
No, I don't think we've done. Now, this issue of knife crime has affected people in our constituencies, but also people that I know. People that I know in West London have been affected by it. And I'm very, very disappointed. I also think that there's something that's happened over the last few years. This was something which was being dealt with. The figures were coming down, certainly in London. But certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a problem. Now, I think government...
And also a cut in police numbers.
I think government has some responsibility, but I also think that there are... I mean, Tim talked about fashion. I wouldn't use that word. But there are cultural issues to do with parenting, to do with society that are relevant, absolutely, to this problem. And I think they have to be dealt with. As Sadiq Khan said, he's not a member of my party, but he said we need to have a holistic approach. And, he's
do you
right
think
about
the government bears any responsibility?
I think the government has, like Margot said, has responsibility for its actions. I think that there are some things that we might have done better. We are trying to do something. We're going to look. As Margot said, we put £1 billion extra into the police.
Hang on. Don't shut down. We'll come to you in a minute.
As Margot said, we're putting £1 billion into the police budget. Sadiq Khan has mentioned the holistic approach. We have our own Home Secretary who's saying that we should put more money into this. We should actually also empower the police. I know it's not popular in some quarters, but we've got to allow the police to do their job. And that's another thing which the Home Secretary is taking a lead on, and I think he's right about that.
Yeah. I think there's so many of you got your hands up about this. This is clearly not only an extremely important issue to you, but one you feel incredibly passionate about. There's a question that came in which has also attracted a lot of attention in the press and generally, and I just want to try and get to it before we close tonight. So if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to try and squeeze this one last question in, which is from Marie Neophytou.
With the WHO deeming the rise in anti-vaxxers as a global public health crisis, should the government make vaccination mandatory?
Right, so, in fact, we had the Health Secretary talking about this only a couple of days ago, saying he didn't want to reach the point of imposing vaccinations on parents, but he wouldn't rule anything out. More than 500,000 children in the UK were unvaccinated against measles from 2010 to 2017. Margot?
I think that tougher action has to be taken here. I mean, a lot
Should
of
it
the
be mandatory?
problem-
That's the question.
Well, I think we should consider making it mandatory, but I think there are other things we can do before we have to make it mandatory. I think we need to hold social media companies far more closely to account for what they allow on their sites and for all the misinformation that is peddled through social media to parents about vaccinations.
Right.
And so I think that we need to do that. I think we need to do more education among parents about the need for vaccinations and through schools. And yes, I mean, ultimately, if that doesn't work, then I think some of these things have to become mandatory. But I would fight shy of that before we've exhausted other things that I think need to be done.
Tim?
I haven't got the deep medical knowledge to make a categorical statement, but if the medical knowledge says, yes, vaccination will hugely reduce the problems, I would say it should be made mandatory. I can't see why you wouldn't do that if it's going to save lives.
I mean, the proportion of children receiving the MMR jab in the UK has fallen over the last 4 years. There's a woman up there with her hand up. Yes, woman in black.
We've had tainted blood scandals. We've had kids that, pregnant women that was injected and then their babies came out disabled. So if you make this man...
What are you talking about there? Not the thalidomide scandal years ago?
Yes, that one.
Right. I think it was medication, but yes.
Yeah, that's correct. So when you make these things mandatory and you put the government in charge, now, you know, how does the parents keep a control of that?
Have you got children? Have you had
Yes, I've got a 5-year-old.
And did you have your child vaccinated?
I did, but I wasn't happy about it. Yeah.
Is there anyone here who hasn't had their child vaccinated, just out of interest? Yes. And why was that?
Because of allergies.
Right, so it just wasn't suitable?
Yes.
Your child wasn't appropriate for your child?
That's correct.
OK, thank you. There was a man there with his hands up in the glasses.
I'm one of the junior doctors at the local hospital up here. And certainly you are seeing an increase day to day of things like mumps, of measles, of cases that actually, when you're at medical school, you sort of think, you know, these are diseases of the past that are coming forth. And I think it's something that's too widely said, but these might be diseases that we've forgotten about, that people don't know what it's like to have polio, to have mumps. But actually, it is something on the increase, and they are severe diseases that have significant consequences for the rest of people's lives. And it might just be a point of education at this point.
What, rather than mandatory?
I think it'd be a good start for more education. I think we have room there if we're looking for spaces to improve on.
The woman right at the back with her hand up, yes.
I think that we do need mandatory vaccinations for the same reason as the gentleman there didn't vaccinate his child, is to keep his child safe. If we are not vaccinating children, we are
well, no,
putting
hang on.
other
I think
people
you were
at
saying
risk.
that because for some children it's not appropriate. I think that's what you're saying with your child.
We need to vaccinate everyone else so we have herd immunity. Because if we do not have a high enough herd immunity, then that gentleman's their child is at risk. And as a society, we are putting the vulnerable at risk. We are putting people on chemotherapy at risk. We are putting young children at risk. We're people who have egg allergies at risk for no reason. There is no proof. I disagree that it's social media that's like putting these things out there. There's no evidence that vaccinations have any harm on children. The thalidomide scandal is completely unrelated to vaccination. Vaccination is essential.
But let's just be clear. There are some children for whom it is too dangerous to have the vaccine because of their health reasons, which I think is what you were saying.
We need to protect those children.
The man there.
I think making vaccinations mandatory is always risky just because people don't like to be told what to do with their own child. But at the same time, we need to get the message out there. This idea that MMR is connected to autism, that was discredited 20 years ago with the Andrew Wakefield scandal. We need to get that out there and tell parents there's no risk at all because it's just causing huge problems. Get the message out there.
I think that just going on from that point, I think that the message has got to come out to parents who are would-be parents, who, when they're going through their NCT classes or having hospital lessons about pregnancy, about what's going to happen, because when they come to making those decisions, they're hormonal, they're tired, they're confused, and I just think it's a message that needs to come out a bit earlier so an informed decision can be made.
I mean, Laura Pidcock, new mum, obviously. I mean, what do you think is going wrong?
Well, I think that it is a bit strange. You've got this new precious little baby in front of you. My son is 11 months old, and I was like, oh, they're going to inject him, and actually they're absolutely fine. You know, my baby didn't even cry. My message would be get your children vaccinated if that is medically right for your child, because this system, as has been said, if we don't all do it, the system falls, if you like. It's only very successful if we all buy into it. So
but given that the numbers are dropping, do you think it should be mandatory? That's the question.
Well, it depends what you mean by mandatory, doesn't it? You know, if we start getting into fine, if we start getting into fines for people not doing it, it's just like, you know, another kind of punishment. People need to get vaccinated. They need their children vaccinated. They need to know that this is an unbelievable resource that we have at our fingertips to protect our children. Please do it.
Woman there with her hand up.
Hi, so I've listened to all of this and it's been really, really interesting and engaging. And also with the issue of education and deprivation that's been raised in different areas and also in this area, would you say that based on areas that are more affluent, where there's more investment into healthcare, into social services, youth services, what about the digital skills investment and technology? Because you mentioned entrepreneurship, Margot, and Jeremy Hunt, obviously an entrepreneur, and you're an entrepreneur as well, and digital skills and success are available in some areas of London and some areas of the UK. But what is the Tory government, Labour government and Lib Dem government going to do to bring that digital skills and tech wealth and opportunity to deprived communities across London where we can actually make a difference and help young people who are from deprived backgrounds and also just anybody in general who wants to get involved with that area that's pushing our country forward, regardless of Brexit or anything else?
OK, that's a great question. I think we're talking about the vaccination at the moment, so if you forgive me, I'm just going to stick with that just for a minute or we won't know where we are. The woman there, yes, in the red.
Yeah. I'm a community health worker, and the problem is when I got the parents told them to have vaccinate their children, the question comes back to me, is the vaccination halal or haram? And I can't answer that. So where do they go? Who's going to answer for that?
The man there in the blue jacket.
Yeah, years ago, my father was paralysed from the neck down. After doing my research, I found out that this is a known side effect of the flu jab. We are not told this in this country, yeah? People are told this in America because they know they will get sued. So the fact is, people do not trust this country in terms of vaccination. You need to wake up and accept that. It's not just about social media, yeah? If it's on social media, it doesn't make it non-factual and not correct. People put things on social media because they want to warn people. You need to get wise up on it.
So you think do you think all vaccinations are dangerous?
I'm not saying all vaccinations are dangerous, but when you know there is a known side effect of something, put it out there. Let people have the choice. My father was in hospital for 9 months, 3 months in intensive care. I was living in Switzerland at the time. I was flying back every weekend, right? We didn't know if he was going to make it or not. We shouldn't have to go through that.
Look, I think what the gentleman made a very good point, and it ties in with what Margot was saying. I think between mandatory vaccination and where we are now, there is a huge amount of education that needs to take place. And the junior doctor, I think, was absolutely right. He mentioned mumps, he mentioned measles. People of my age, people older than me, remember those illnesses. But now, today, many young people don't have a clue what these illnesses involve. And I think before we get to a point, as I agree with Margot, before we get to a point where we have mandatory vaccination, we need a lot more education and a lot more transparency. That's what the gentleman in the jacket was saying. There's got to be more transparency about the effects of these vaccinations and also the devastating consequences of the illnesses that many of us have forgotten about. So let's have education and let's have some transparency before we have a mandatory, decide to go down the mandatory vaccination route.
Ed.
If we think about the number of children who are getting seriously ill because they're not being vaccinated, that's what we need to have in our minds. and the impact that has on their families and the guilt they feel that they've not been vaccinated. And so I think we need to take this extraordinarily seriously. We need to really understand probably the many reasons why people aren't letting their children get vaccinated. The lady there who was a community health worker, you gave an example, I never heard that. It's just really interesting. And we need to get all this information together so the government can take proper action. It's clearly got to be about education and more information.
What, rather than making it mandatory?
Yeah, I think we should stop just short of that. But I think we do need to make sure that the people who are delivering the information, the health visitors, have the tools to try to persuade people. We need to also understand why the trust has broken down. I think trust in this area and in many areas of our life has broken down. People don't trust the experts, the scientists anymore, and that needs to be tackled because they are trying to help everybody. We have the amazing NHS. We've got to get behind it, and so we've got to sort this problem out so that the children who are getting ill don't get it in the future.
OK. Well, I can see that we could keep on talking about this, but I'm afraid our hour is up. Oh, no, you're shouting, I know.
We're just getting going.
We're just getting going. No. I'm afraid our time is up, much as I'd like to carry on. Our next programme is in Halifax. The following week, we will be in Chichester, so call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience. And why wouldn't you, when you've seen how engaged everyone has been with things this evening? Or you can go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. If you want to have your say on tonight's topics, and you can all do this as well, you can join Adrian Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live right now. So the debate continues. But for now, thank you very much to my panel, to all of you for joining in, and of course to you at home for watching and listening from Tottenham. Bye-bye.
More political talk next on BBC One. It's This Week with guests Richard Madeley and Henning Wehn in just a moment.